We've all heard this story. An asteroid slams into Earth and wipes out the dinosaurs. But what most people don't realize is just how insane things got after the impact. This wasn't just an extinction. It was a total planetary reset. Firestorms scorched the skies. Tsunamis swallowed coastlines and nearly every creature on Earth vanished. And yet, somehow, life clawed its way back. So what exactly happened in those first few hours, days, and years after the asteroid hit? Strap in, because this story starts with a bang. At this point, we all know the story. 66 million years ago, the Earth was vibrant, diverse, and teeming with life. Home to towering monsters, it may not have been the Earth we know today, but it definitely was a wonder to behold. Towering tyrannosaurs walked the land, herds of horned triceratops fed peacefully, and the dense forests had all sorts of life humming throughout. But it wasn't just the land that thrived, because even the oceans were full of monsters the likes we have never seen before and might never see again. From mosasaurs to ammonites and the very layered ecosystems, the world was in a kind of relative peace. That is until the cosmos attacked. Suddenly, in what was quite literally a 1 in 100 million event, the sky burst into flames, and life as we knew it was changed forever. An asteroid entering our atmosphere isn't rare at all. In fact, that's exactly what a shooting star is. Tiny space rocks and debris enter Earth's atmosphere all the time, burning up from the intense friction and lighting up the sky in a brief flash. But those are small, maybe the size of a pebble or a grain of sand. What entered the Earth 66 million years ago, though, was anything but small and a different story entirely. This cosmic bullet was 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles wide, and it hit the Earth from space at around 20 kilometers per second, or about 45,000 miles per hour. At that pulsating speed, this meteoroid, known as the Chicxulub asteroid, didn't just impact the Earth, it threw the planet into a state of imbalance in an instant and induced what can only be called a nightmare. The comet struck at a steep angle between 45 and 60 degrees, hitting the shallow seas of what we call the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact of this arrow from the stars caused an explosion that released about 10 to the 23rd joules of energy. Now, that's a bit hard to imagine. After all, it's one with about 24 zeros behind it. But to help you picture this impact, the energy released was more than 1 billion Hiroshima bombs being detonated at once. The result of this insane assault was, as you would imagine, a crater nearly 200 kilometers across and over a kilometer deep, and one of the largest and best preserved scars on our planet's crust. So what happened on the day the stars killed the Earth? Well, to put it simply, it was hell. At the point of impact, matter didn't just burn, it vaporized. The comet struck with such force that the bedrock and seawater around it instantly turned into superheated plasma. The temperature of the area immediately rose to several thousand degrees, and anything within 1,800 kilometers or over 1,100 miles was instantly vaporized, caught in the surf, in the midst of superheated shockwave, blasting out at over 1,000 kilometers per hour. For context, that's New York City to Miami, Lagos to Dakar, or even better, the entire region of Western Europe gone in an instant, vaporized like paper in a hurricane of fire. Safe to say, dinosaurs, plants, insects, absolutely nothing stood a chance. Nothing survived in that zone. The very air became a weapon of mass destruction, but that was just the beginning. Following this insane baptism of fire, the seismic energy that was released can only be described as immense, unleashing a magnitude 10 earthquake, the likes of which have never been recorded in human history. This comet rippled across the globe. Nothing stood a chance. Even aquatic animals were not safe as massive undersea landslides buried marine habitats. Coastal cliffs crumbled, rivers surged backwards, land cracked open and reformed in violent spasms. The entire planet shook, and then came the waves. See, like a badly written disaster movie, the asteroid's impact displaced millions of tons of ocean, and they had to return to their initial state. And so, this baptism by fire transformed into a baptism by water as the impact created tsunamis of over 100 meters tall, with estimates going as high as 300 meters tall. The waves launched out across the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic, and even the Tethys Ocean, an ancient ocean that lay between the two supercontinents, Laurasia, which has consisted of temporary North America, Europe, and Asia, and Gondwana, which comprised parts of modern-day South America, Africa, Antarctica, and Australia. In an event intent on wiping out everything, life along the coastal zones, from swimming reptiles to nesting dinosaurs, were absolutely annihilated. The waves raced inland, reaching as far as 100 kilometers, leaving behind tangled wreckage, downed forests, torn vegetation, and sediment layers mixed with charcoal and shattered bone. At this point, we've seen it all. Earthquakes that shook the world, tsunamis that drowned the continents, and flaming winds that decimated all in their path. But the worst was yet to come, as gravity attacked. See, at impact, fragments of rock, glass, and molten ejecta were blasted high above Earth's atmosphere. And as Newton taught us, what goes up must come down. Only this time, it came with death. See, this wasn't just falling debris anymore. It was something else. As trillions of tons of materials re-entered the atmosphere, they superheated the skies to the point where the upper atmosphere became like an oven, igniting wildfires across the entire planet. Trees did not merely ignite and burn, they exploded from heat stress. Global wildfires raged across North and South America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. The air was filled with smoke and soot, and geological records from places as far-flung as Denmark, New Zealand, and the United States show black layers rich in carbon and impact spherules, all thanks to the ash clouds that circled the globe. And the worst killer of them all began: the impact winter. But wait, what do you mean winter? Wasn't the world a melting pot of disaster? Well, as we mentioned before, billions of tons of dust, ash, and sulfur aerosols blotted out the sun. This effectively created a blanket that killed the Earth. Photosynthesis stopped. Global temperatures plummeted, and the planet entered a state of darkness and cold that would last hundreds of years. It was so bad that plankton, the base of the marine food chain, died off rapidly. Terrestrial plants withered, and as you would expect with the collapse of producers, herbivores starved. And if the herbivores were gone, then you know the predators followed not long after. Basically, the entire food web unraveled in real time. To make it crazier, creatures didn't just die en masse, they died differently, depending on where they were. Near the blast, they faced instant incineration. On land, the creatures were burnt alive or smothered beneath the ash and heat of the wildfires. In coastal regions, they were swallowed by a rising sea level and drowned in the tide. In one single day, fossil evidence suggests life on Earth experienced a sudden and rapid extinction of as much as 75% of all species, including not only non-avian dinosaurs, but also flying pterosaurs, marine ammonoids, but also many of Earth's ancient plants. In a geological blink, Earth was unrecognizable. The forests that once shook with the footsteps of titanic predators were silent. Oceans that teemed with ancient life went eerily still. The skies, once full of winged reptiles, turned black. The Chicxulub impact wasn't just a disaster, it was the most violent reset in Earth's history. But while the impact was undoubtedly hellish, the following years would be a nightmare unlike any other in human history. This was the Cenozoic Era. Starting immediately after the asteroid impact, also known as the KPG extinction, the Cenozoic Era was a geological period that began around 66 million years ago and still continues up until today, often referred to as the Age of Mammals. This era was, or should we say is, marked by an astounding amount of evolutionary changes, from environmental transformations to the eventual rise of the mammals that would come to dominate the Earth. This era quite literally defined the world you see today. It was the era that saw the extinction of the dinosaurs, the emergence of the first true mammals, and the establishment of the ecosystems that we desperately try to protect today. So, what exactly happened over the past 66 million years? And how did evolution make its greatest comeback in history? Well, as with most ecosystems, the Cenozoic Era recovered from the burning by bringing back the primary consumer, aka the plants. This time period began with serious changes to the Earth's flora. But how? According to research, with the demise of the dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous, a new chapter in plant life began, and early in this era, the Earth was, unlike you would expect, dominated by lush vegetation. With ample space to grow and less predation, these plants had to quickly fill the void left by the extinction of many plant-eating species. And among the first plants to become established was the common fern. As one of the first true plants to evolve on land, the fern became the very first vascular plant. It appeared during the Devonian period, around 400 million years ago. There was a rapid colonization of this plant type across the globe, likely in large measures from its ability to thrive in moist and warm growing conditions during the Paleocene and Eocene epochs. As the ferns prospered in the land burnt by the stars, they were followed by conifers and cycads, both of which formed dense forests across much of the planet, particularly in areas that we now call North America and Europe. Now, this is all fine and well, but the most significant plant transition that the world would see occurred during this early to middle part of the Cenozoic, when flowering plants, known as angiosperms, began to diversify. Now, today we say flowers are important to the ecosystem, but at that point, they were not just important to the ecosystem, they were part of its backbone. They were important not only in their ecological capacity, but for the animals that would evolve to rely on them and their offspring. Flowering plants essentially provided a new resource of food and shelter for herbivores, early mammals and birds, and, of course, insects. Ultimately, the more diverse flowering plants became and the continued presence of flowering plants reshaped ecosystems, diversifying and complexing the plant and animal life. But let's not get too focused on the plants, because while the plant kingdom was busy doing amazing things, the animal kingdom was not to be outdone. In fact, one of the most famous members of the Cenozoic was a monster that we can thank the universe has gone extinct, the Titanoboa. A menace while alive, the Titanoboa was a huge snake that lived in modern-day South America about 60 million years ago. This thing was such a nightmare that its name quite literally means Titanic boa, not giant, Titanic. In fact, the Titanoboa was the largest snake to roam the Earth, and it did so without competition. Found through the fossil record, the Titanoboa was measured at lengths of up to 42 feet or 13 meters and weighed around 2,500 pounds or approximately 1,135 kilograms. For those who can't imagine these stats, this snake was the size of a bus. But how does a snake grow that large? The answer is simple. This snake could grow this size because of the Earth's warm climate that allowed reptiles to grow larger than present-day snakes during the Paleocene, terrorizing swampy tropical regions that were abundant with life. This bus-sized crawling danger preyed on large fish, amphibians, and even crocodile-like reptiles. As you would expect from a snake that weighed more than a full-grown polar bear, the Titanoboa's size and predatory nature made it an apex predator of its time. But much more than that, its existence tells us about the warm, oxygen-rich atmosphere of the early Cenozoic. Essentially, its existence alone suggests that the era's climate played a critical role in supporting the growth of seriously immense reptiles. However, this time, of course, wouldn't last forever, and the Titanoboa became extinct, probably because of the global cooling that occurred during the Eocene-Oligocene transition and shifting ecosystem dynamics. But snakes weren't the only animals that made this time period deadly, as even the birds were a force to be reckoned with, and among these birds, there was no other as terrifying as the terror bird. You see, the evolution of the terror bird was something entirely unique, as it was in fact a narrative that ended the same way it started. See, South America was an isolated continent during the Cenozoic, and this was very important in terms of its fauna evolving. The isolation gave the animals room to evolve and not compete with as many animals as before. This evolutionary environment gave us one of the most insane and terrifying evolutionary groups, the terror birds. These massive flightless birds were all classified under the family Phorusrhacidae and existed from moderate size to gigantic size and were apex predators. These birds lived throughout the ecoregions of South America during the Paleocene, Pleistocene, and were classified under the order Cariamiformes. Now, what made these birds so terrifying was that some had huge beaks, sharp claws, and large legs, which they used to hunt and kill large animals. But it wasn't the legs and beaks that scared archaeologists. It was the fact that some birds reached sizes of over 10 feet or 3 meters tall, especially notorious species like the Andalgalornis and Kalenkin. These birds evolved a long, hooked beak that could easily rip into flesh and bone, and legs that not only allowed them to quickly run at high speeds, but also allowed these opportunistic predators to hunt small to medium-sized mammals and other vertebrates. As if that wasn't enough, these frightening creatures, although not typically hunters of large animals, were certainly capable of taking them down when the opportunity arose. But here's where things get seriously problematic for these monstrous birds. The whole reason terror birds had such a remarkable evolutionary history was because of the unique circumstances the isolation of South America created. This isolated region allowed them to flourish without competition from carnivorous animals. However, things quickly changed as their reign was relatively short and their evolution was interrupted by something called the Great American Interchange. See, more than 3 million years ago, during the Pleistocene, The Isthmus of Panama formed a land bridge that allowed for the migration of species between North and South America during what we now call the Great American Interchange. As a land bridge connected North America and South America, animals began migrating back and forth across the continents. Horses, deer, and saber-toothed cats from the north migrated to the south, while the armadillo, giant sloth, and terror birds migrated north from the south. This exchange would ultimately be the end of the terror birds because it allowed for fierce competition to happen, especially for the South American species that were not accustomed to such fierce predators. To put it simply, predators such as the jaguar and smilodon from the north outcompeted native hunters such as the flightless terror bird, causing their extinction. Due to the extinction of the dinosaurs and many reptiles, mammals soon began to run the show and were able to diversify and dominate the earth. To put it simply, the Cenozoic was truly the age of mammals, as these animals engaged in new activities and took on forms that were broadly more varied than any before them. See, at the beginning of the Cenozoic, mammals were still relatively small organisms that were not super important. But by the Eocene and Oligocene, something changed. The members of the planet evolved rapidly over a few years into different groups and effectively outcompeted all other forms of life. A good example of this Cenozoic mammal group were the proboscideans, which include the best-known mastodons, mammoths, and their relatives. These mammals were so successful that, other than Antarctica, these large herbivores occupied practically every continent. And as if that wasn't insane enough, some species were as tall as 14 feet or over 4 meters at the shoulder. But size aside, they were suited for various environments, from frigid tundra to tropical forests. A good example was the mighty mammoth, clearly descended from proboscideans. Mammoths were well adapted to cold temperatures, their thick fur kept the cold out, and their big tusks helped them in foraging for food during the super long, icy winters. But mammals didn't only conquer the land, because in the Cenozoic waters, the cetaceans reigned supreme. The cetaceans were basically sea mammals, a group that consisted of modern whales, dolphins, and porpoises. But even amongst an already extremely fearsome crew, there was an even more terrifying hunter called the Livyatan Melvillei. This monster was named after Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick, and was an ancient whale that lived some 12 million years ago. According to archaeological evidence, the Livyatan could grow to lengths of up to 60 feet or 18 meters. And as if that wasn't scary enough, it was a big toothy whale with teeth the size of 13 inches or 33 centimeters. For context, this is a predator about the length of a school bus or a London double-decker with teeth the size of a wine bottle, or better yet, the size of your whole arm. Among other big marine species, like the equally massive megalodon, this apex predator hunted smaller whales and squid. More than just causing fear, their presence showed how cetaceans had developed into strong marine predators and marked a major evolutionary turning point. Moving on from the ocean, another mammal that ruled the Cenozoic was the Andrewsarchus, a carnivorous mammal of the Eocene period, roughly 45 million years ago. Measuring around 3 meters or 10 feet long and weighing several hundred kilograms, the Andrewsarchus was among the biggest carnivorous mammals of the epoch. Although Andrewsarchus's classification is unclear and still under discussion today due to its poor fossil record, archaeologists believe it looked like a bulky, wolf-like predator with a massive head and short legs. We know about the massive head thanks to the enormous skull of about 3 feet or 1 meter long that was found. Today, it is believed that the Andrewsarchus is related to contemporary carnivores such as dogs and bears. Perfectly fitted as the apex predator in its habitat, the Andrewsarchus would have hunted tiny mammals and made life a living hell for many. As if a giant wolf-bear-dog wasn't bad enough, the Cenozoic era was also home to the Terminator Pig, or more scientifically called the Entelodont. Thriving during the Eocene and Miocene epochs, these monsters had enormous jaws and sharp teeth capable of crushing bones. Now, even though the Terminator Pig had the word pig in their name, they were not true pigs, but their appearance and behavior were similar to some carnivorous pigs of today. With enormous jaws, they were able to consume nearly anything they could fit in their mouth, including carrion, small mammals, and larger prey whenever the opportunity presented itself. Basically, life after the dinosaurs was anything but simple. It was violent, confusing, and everything around was determined to survive. Throw in the insane climate fluctuations, and the Cenozoic era was simply the formula for nightmare fuel. It was, and still is, a free-for-all survival contest, with mammals becoming the prevalent life form on the planet, ultimately leading to us, Homo sapiens, the conquerors of the madness. In a way, we still live in this hell, but a much calmer version of it. Evolution has become tamer. Giants have grown smaller, and the once chaotic climate has grown a bit softer. But don't forget for a moment that all it takes is just one incident, and we, the residents of hell, might just have to fight for survival again. But what do you think? Was the extinction of the dinosaurs really just a cosmic accident? Or was it the start of a whole new world, waiting for life to rebuild? For millions of years, mammals, plants, and even colossal snakes like the Titanoboa began to rule, reshaping Earth's ecosystem in ways we're still trying to understand. The Earth was no longer the same, but life fought back, evolving in ways we never saw coming.